Hi, my name is Megan Wright, and I am Senior Curator at Saatchi Art. We are partners with the Other Art Fair, and today I'm going to be doing a talk about figurative works at the Other Art Fair, Brooklyn, New York. This is for the virtual fairs, and typically we would be at the fairs in person in Brooklyn, giving tours and talking to the artist. And the virtual fairs are a great way to celebrate these artists and look at these works without being in person, although we hope to be in the very near future. So thank you for joining us, and I will begin the presentation now. So today we will be discussing art in the age of COVID, new figurative works capturing the contemporary human experience at the Other Art Fair Brooklyn. And this cover work is by one of our feature artists and somebody that we see a lot at the fairs when they are in person, Zen Padron. And you'll see the number of facial coverings in this image. I think that they're so wonderful and diverse. Our team is a team of 5+ curators at Saatchi Art. So if you have any questions about any of the work that you see in this presentation, any of the work you see at the Other Art Fair Virtual Editions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can send you additional images, speak to the artist on your behalf with any questions you might have. We can help negotiate pricing if that is something of interest. So please don't hesitate to reach out anytime you'd like. The first artist that we will be featuring today is Brendan Cramp. Brendan has exhibited at the Other Art Fair before, and his work is just so lovely, as is he. So I wanted to talk a bit about him and his work today. He is originally from St. Paul, Minnesota, and was interested in painting and the arts as a child, but left and studied literature at university, never thinking that being an artist would be a viable career. And now, several years later, that dream has become a reality. He works in and lives in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and he's part of a large artist community there of, he says, about 1,700 plus. And they have studios in all of the factories and industrial buildings around the city. And they all support each other and bolster each other's careers. And it's just a wonderful community to be a part of. He works in oil and paints urban interiors around him, coffee shops, city buildings, trails, parks, businesses. And he is inspired by the people he sees, and especially inspired by the light he sees in a space, and how that light creates a mood and how it reflects the scene. Brendan did a lot of his graduate work in coffee shops, writing all day, and now he feels that he can do that as an artist as well. He not only documents them, but he spends time in them sketching and drawing. He takes photographs of the spaces that he intends to paint, sometimes hundreds of photographs, and takes them back and begins to work on a piece. And his painting technique is involved and intricate, and it can take 4 to 5 weeks to paint a space or more. And he said that he often thinks of his work as film images, stills from a film. And you get a sense of the atmosphere of a room, the characters in it, the quiet, the past, the present, what could be happening in that space and what might happen. So what we did talk about what happened to his work during the pandemic. He had 14 shows canceled, and he said that lended himself to an intensive and immersive experience in the studio. He didn't want to just focus on what was happening in the city during COVID, but what he had shot prior to COVID. So work like this, called The Tile Makers, is a work that he worked on quite a bit. It's his largest work to date. It's 6 by 5 feet, and it is the interior of a tile business in nearby to where he works. And he just loves the light reflecting in the space. I'll go back to the slide prior. This piece called A Map of the World, and its tin ceilings and the detail that he's exhibited here, and the solitary figure of the barista working on his own. He mentioned that when he was painting these spaces during COVID, the absence of people allowed him to focus more on the architectural aspects of the spaces. So the tile work, the molding at the top, the mirrors, the countertop, etc. And he was saying when it's bright outside like this, it creates a kind of snow blindness on the inside, and he loves that. This is another work that he painted during the past year, and this is a coffee shop in Portland, Oregon, where he was able to travel. And again, your solitary barista in this beautiful light-filled room. And he loves that this piece was such a challenge for him because of all the different sources of light, the surfaces, and the mood of the day as the barista goes about his work, preparing the coffee, almost frozen in time. The next artist we will focus on is Charity Henderson. She's based in Queens, New York, and she has been a figurative artist for over 7 years. She graduated with her MFA from UMass Dartmouth in 2013 with a concentration in painting. And she finds her inspiration in the experiences and stories that can be read in a person's face, especially their eyes. In particular, she's interested in the female gaze. And you'll see all the beautiful female figures that she has painted here. Her process is incredibly unique. She works in oil and graphite, and her work is done primarily on translucent films such as Duralar. Both the front and back sides of these films can be worked, and this lends to a work, a depth and its layered effect. She draws on one side of the sheet and then flips it over and paints on the other side. The drawing comes through as a ghost image in areas where the paint is thinner. And then she also blurs and scrapes the paint with rectangles of mat board. And so all of this creates an incredibly ethereal and translucent quality in the images. And this only adds to the ethereal quality of the faces of her models. Surprisingly, she said that the pandemic hasn't changed her work much. She has a studio in her home, and the commute is the same. But she does feel that the work is all the more relevant because of what's been going on in the world. She says these slightly dissolving, fragmenting faces speak to the sense of dislocation and loss that so many have experienced in the past year. Her work is an exploration of psychological states of mind. The blurred paint hints at memories, hopes, and fears, lost or concealed. Our next artist is a familiar face at the other art fair, Zen Padron. And if you've attended the fair in the recent past, you most likely saw Zen and his wife busy in their booths, chatting everybody up. And just the gloriousness of all the colors that his space provides. But I thought this was a wonderful time to chat a little bit more in depth with Zen and learn more about his work because he's so busy at the fairs. We never really get a chance to talk about his history and his experience. So let's learn a little bit more about Zen. He is originally from Galicia, Spain, in the northwest corner of Spain. And his first memories are being a 7 or 8-year-old taking photos with his journalist father, who taught him on a Voigtlander camera. At 13 years old, his godfather, who was a photojournalist, gifted him a full darkroom set as a birthday present. And that is how the artistry chose him. He didn't initially become a full-time photographer. He toured as a musician, playing the electric bass for over a decade. And he says, traveling all my life with both my bass and my camera, and at some point I dropped the bass, and I actually think my photography has a lot to do with being a bass player. Always there, always invisible, always watching. I think that the music is in the composition of the works, the orchestration of the people moving through the streets. I feel the music in his artwork, absolutely. He freelanced as a photographer for different publications and also worked as a translator, and then one day became a full-time photographer. The time-lapse project that you see here is what he has been focused on in recent years. And he will find a wall, usually in the city that he's in. And Zen says, quote, "My itinerant life takes me around the world on a constant basis, and I love walking around cities, finding a spot to sit for a couple hours and unnoticed photograph people passing by against a wall. These quotidian gestures combined create a unique narrative of life by a wall in a place in the world. Time lapse, one place, one moment." And his travels and his work have taken him to locations where he's photographed these people and these figures all over the world: Spain, the US, Dominican Republic, China, Italy, Portugal, Cuba, France, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Colombia, Brazil. And since this work takes a lot of time in travel, he does spend quite a bit of time planning out the projects. And then once he gets back to his studio, working for 2 to several weeks at a time, composing the final product. And how has the pandemic changed his work? During the summer of 2020, he was able to return to New York, where he resides, and he began documenting the city and its empty streets and changing facade. He said, "No tourists in the streets, Midtown workers working massively from home. Many residents fled, pushed by the uncertainty caused by the pandemic. Some people lost their jobs and couldn't afford to live in the city anymore. The human landscape of New York City has changed dramatically, and so did the behavior of those living here during COVID. This collection is an ongoing work which I hope helps us remember how vulnerable we are, while also serving as a reminder of New Yorkers' epic resilience and hope." This is a work taken during COVID. It's called Time Lapse Hell's Kitchen. Another work, Time Lapse Grove Street, New York City in the Rain, reflects the emotion of the time that it was shot, and the 13th Street West Village. This is a work that's very important to Zen, who became a US citizen within the past few years, as he was originally from Spain, and always having the feeling of not quite being here permanently. Becoming a citizen changed all that. And he decided that he wanted to commemorate the experience by photographing red, white, and blue walls and creating this new work called We the People. He said, "It was a fascinating process for me. New York City is just a universe in itself, and creating this flag in the city where millions of immigrants like me became locals was my way of trying to visualize, quote unquote, we, as opposed to the quote unquote I. No matter how divided we think we are still a community of people sharing a space in the world and a way of life." And this is another project that he worked on during COVID. This was around the beginning when he was at home in Spain with family and feeling that he wanted to get out and travel and be creative and had to figure out alternative ways and means. He began creating imaginary people with the elements around him, like the lemons from his lemon tree. And here you can see the Lemonheads exploring their own little city and hanging out in the garden. And I think these are so special. And they almost help us to commemorate a time that wasn't easy, but had special moments for things like this. Our last artist is Demarcus McGowan. He is born in Dallas, Texas, and living and working in Brooklyn, New York. He says that his mother was an inspiration for his work. She encouraged him to express himself as a child, developing his talents and creating a career in painting. He works in photography, graphic design, and acrylic paints. And he's inspired by the world around him as well, and the people that he knows and loves in the faces that he sees. He works as a life coach, and so he feels this kinship with people on a different level, and therefore working in the pandemic was almost more emotionally moving and inspirational for his work. This is part of a series called Ambassador of Harlem, where he did figures in Harlem and Country Boy in Harlem. And you can see the collage aspect, the mixed media aspect in the background of his work. In other pieces, he utilizes materials including fabric, and he tends to draw on pop art as well. He loves color and the vibrancy and the way that it reflects the people. Like this model who he worked with in this piece called Trust. And he had to inspire her to learn to trust him. And this is just a gorgeous, vibrant crimson work called Silky. It's a story about power, beauty, grace, and style. It's also a story of quote unquote becoming. It creates a dialogue with race, gender, authenticity, vulnerability, and self-love. Demarcus's work in mental health and its influence on his work has only been bolstered by this time of introspection. He said he went a bit deeper into his practice, focusing more on the narratives of each subject. And he believes that he was able to tap into those narratives more, and we have some beautiful images as a result. And those are 4 artists at the other art fair in Brooklyn. If you have any questions about these artists or any of the works that you see, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We can be reached at Curator@saatchiart.com. And thank you so much for your time today.